Hello. As the thumbnail suggests, I've just finished this book, Siege and Storm. It's the second by Leigh. How do you pronounce that? Bardugo, I guess. In a series of 3 that are called the Shadow and Bone trilogy. I'll link below the link to the first one that I read, which I really enjoyed. I thought it was called Shadow and Bone after the trilogy. I thought it was really creative and enjoyable. I wasn't as impressed by number 2, not by any means, and though I finished it a few times, there was skim reading to get there. So one of the things I really loved about the first Shadow and Bone is that it was set in a non-Western background. There was lashings of Russia, Cyrillic language. It was different. That difference is absence from Siege and Storm. Occasionally it seems like she remembers to throw in a word in Russian or Polish or something. But for the most part, it's generic. It's generic young adult fantasy. Young adult, young adulty. And that doesn't serve it particularly well. So the writing isn't distinctive. It's not particularly good. It's not particularly bad either, mind you. It's just generic young adult writing. The characters leave a lot to be desired, and the editing was inadequate for the purpose. So it's not a small book. It runs to 386 pages, and the last three or so are called After, and it tries to set a sort of mythic-y fairy tale to the scheme. The beginning starts off quite good. Now, a problem with the number 2 is always going to be it's a filler. It's a filler between the beginning of the story, which is the first book, and the end of the story, so you know it's never going to really satisfy. Number 1 satisfied, and it would have satisfied fairly adequately as a standalone book. This is clearly not a standalone book, and it doesn't really satisfy. Now, at the back, there's an interview with the author where she said this is the first book that she'd written under a deadline. And I think that shows quite a lot, because see these 2 pink bookmarks? All of this section was bloated, unwieldy, unnecessary, and largely very, very boring. So that's from approximately 120s to 340s. All of that could probably have been done in a couple of dozen well-edited pages. And honestly, I really didn't enjoy them. So the characters in the first one that was significant was Alina, who's the sun summoner, her friend since childhood, Mel, who accompanies her on her journey, and the Darkling, who is the main head of the order of they don't call themselves magicians, they've got these powers. He's the head of their order, he's a Darkling, he summons darkness, he's been looking for a sun summoner forever, etc., etc. Those characters, which were quite decent in the first book, are not decent here. They are lost, underutilized, underdeveloped. They become flat and uninteresting. The plot, you can really narrow it down to 3 sections. You've got the front, which is good plot, the middle, which is instantly forgettable, and the end, which is the ending to this book, and it's setting up the next book to come. And so while these 2 bits aren't too bad, they are at best not marvelous. At best they're okay. They're adequate for a number 2 book. But in terms of reading enjoyment, there wasn't a lot. I didn't love it. I didn't like the writing. I've mentioned that the characters were unnecessary. They were unnecessarily ignored, really. They just were. They were already there. And I don't feel that I can see what the plot was trying to do, but I don't think it does it. Now, will I continue reading to the third? I've already ordered it. If I hadn't already ordered it, I probably wouldn't. But it's already on the way, so when it arrives, I'll probably read it. I'll need to read something in between for palate cleanser. So that's everything that I can say without it being a total spoiler. If you've read the first one and you're waiting for the second one, I hope I prepared you for the disappointment that is very likely going to come. Unless you're really, really young. If you're really, really young adult, you might enjoy it. From here on, we're looking at spoilers. So, having almost finished this, I was so bored with it, I was actually reading other people's reviews. To my astonishment, the majority of readers seemed to really enjoy it. Some of my friends who've read it, they were a little bit more lukewarm, but they also tend to be mature age readers rather than teenagers. In the positive, even gushing enjoyment of many of the teenage reviewers, it seems to come down to one or two things. They're either got a crush on Nikolai, or they've got a crush on the Darkling. And everyone seems to hate Mel. I don't get it. He's the one character in this entire book that is even halfway decent. But yeah. So it's Team Nikolai, oh, he's so hot. Or it's Team Darkling, it's like, oh, he's so dreamy. And it's like, yeah, you know what? I get Nikolai. Nikolai is kind of like Captain John Sparrow, only with better oral hygiene. And he's got a little bit of that... if you're old enough to remember The Princess Bride, the Dread Captain Roberts, well, when you saw him leaving the ship, you knew it was going to be a Dread Captain Roberts moment, and it was. He's fun, he's got conversation, turns out he's a prince, so he's rich, hot, rich, vocal prince. Well, it's a story as old as time. Milton Boone has been living off it for decades, Harlequin has been living off it for decades. Most old stories have done it. So no wonder a lot of people are Team Nikolai. When it comes to the Darkling, sure, he's an evil, hundreds of years old, but hot guy. I get it. When I was a teenager, I was into bad boys too. If he's hot and he's an evil villain, I mean, go for it. If you're over the age of adulthood in your country of origin, though, I would seriously recommend that you just go out and find some good porn. Because Nikolai and the Darkling... very wishy-washy, if you ask me. If you're watching this, I assume you did ask me. Okay, so in the first part is where we follow Mel and Alina. They've managed to escape from the country of Rakova. They're trying to run away from the Darkling. That doesn't work. He catches them. They go on board a ship, and the Darkling is taking her to find the next immortal creature that once she gets the amplifier from that, she's going to be twice as strong as she was after she got the amplifier from the White Stag in the first book. So the second book, she goes off and she finds the second immortal mythical creature. It's a sea serpent. She does actually kill this one. She finds herself on a ship that is mysterious, got all this mysterious Krishna on it, and it's got a captain called Stormhound, who's obviously not what he seems. She gets her added amplifier. She now has two, which is thought to be impossible in all Grisha mythology. She's incredibly powerful. She manages to fight off the Darkling. And when Captain Stormhound escapes the ship with part of his crew, he takes her and Mel along. They wouldn't have found the sea serpent, mythical sea serpent, without Mel, who is the tracker to end all trackers. And no one thinks that's a superpower, but never mind. Okay. So Stormhound turns out to be Prince Nikolai from Rakova. They all end up back in Rakova. I have to say that the beginning went well. The plotting, I thought, was going to go one way, but it didn't. It went in a new and refreshing and exciting way. I was quite happy about that. Once we went back to Rakova, things kind of went downhill. So Prince Nikolai wanted Alina to be his queen, and they'd return with all her powers, a sun summoner, etc. She doesn't want to be queen. She wants to be the leader of the second army, which are the Grisha, who have these extra superpowers. I guess that's the girl boss moment. Thing is, she's a teenager from peasant stock who knows nothing about being a leader. They, king and queen, give it to her because they need a sun summoner to combat the Darkling who's going to come back and try and conquer the kingdom. And this is where it all starts going very, very wrong, really, because Alina hasn't got anything to make her a leader of the Second Army. She works in the first book because she's basically peasant stock. She's not too smart, she's not too stupid, she's not too pretty, she's not too interesting. She's a very blah character around which things happen, and that's fine. But for this much of this book, we need to cope with Alina suddenly being the general commander of the Second Army and doing all this amazing stuff, and her character is even more negligible than it was in the first one. Now, there's themes here that we can see that the author is trying for. She's trying to suggest that Alina, by getting 2 amplifiers, and there's a third that'll happen in the third book, I'm sure, is becoming something more than human or less than human. You're meant to see her humanity slowing off her as she becomes this incredibly powerful being. Unfortunately, that doesn't work, because Alina never had much character to begin with. So you can't see humanity dropping away from someone who never had any. She didn't have a lot of humanity. She didn't have a lot of character. These weak attempts to show her becoming less than what she was, they don't work. The only thing that really made Alina ever interesting was the fact that she and Mal had a relationship, and you could see a character through that relationship. But through all of this, we're meant to show how she and Mal fall apart as she's attracted to Nikolai, or the Darkling comes to her in her dreams, or whatever. The slow dematerialization of the only part of Alina that was interesting, which is Alina and Mal, meant that there wasn't left to be interested in. And I wasn't. I just wasn't very interested in it. Hence all the skim reading. Mal's story arc is actually mildly interesting. It seems logical to me that if someone was in part of this incredible relationship, that was Alina was the core of his being. He's agreed to come back to the city of Os whatever in the country of Rakva just for her, and now she's turning away from him. His response is actually logical. I quite like him. Don't see much of him, but yeah. So what other themes are there meant to be? Oh, there's meant to be the theme of Alina developing as a great general, but there's just nothing about her. She's wishy-washy, and she's quite stupid, and she's got no ability to lead humans or deal with them, which you wouldn't expect. You wouldn't expect any of these from the Alina character that we were introduced to in the first book. But in the second book, this much of it is meant to be about that Alina, and she doesn't exist. It's just not well written. All of this should have been edited down to about so much and would have been fine. Right, at the end, finally, the Darkling turns up and he attacks the castle, and all the very little milky blah types of defences that were being set up that were meant to occupy the majority of this book and didn't, they fall because he's the Darkling, and of course they didn't. Mel saves Alina again. A huge fanatical number of warriors who think she's a saint save her from the Darkling and the wreckage. One actually interesting thing does happen around about here, though. So at this point, I nearly stopped reading, to be honest, and I did skim read to get to that point. I went back and read it again properly. The Darkling corners Alina and the 3 or 4 Grisha warriors that she's still got left in the chapel, and promises if she comes to him, he will let the others live. So she goes to him, and it's like, oh my god. Just shoot me now. This is appallingly bad. But she goes to him with a purpose. And the purpose actually makes that little bit of narrative halfway decent and halfway worth reading. So the book doesn't end on the incredibly long blah slope that has occupied most of the reading time. I read all of that. Okay, so I skim read a few bits here and there, maybe there, maybe there. But for the majority, I read all of this, and I resent the fact that the editors didn't do something about it. Leigh Bardugo, I like what she's doing overall. I liked the first one better because you managed to make it feel not American. This one feels American. It's lost all the mojo of Russia and, I don't know, Northern or Eastern European countries that it had. You almost never encounter any words that aren't in American. Every, 24 pages or so, a word is thrown out there just to remind you that we're meant to be in not normal YA fantasy land. The good bits are insufficient to make up for the bloating. It severely needed editing. If this was her first attempt trying to write to a deadline, I hope she's learnt from this, and the third will be better. In the third, there are things we can predict and things we can't predict. It's like this continual Alina, Mel, Nikolai, Darkling is going to continue, and I'm already bored with it. I was bored with it by around about here. I was bored beyond belief by the end of this book. I will read the third one. I guess it's on its way. I've already ordered it. I've got to read the last one. Ruin and Rising. I don't have high hopes. I don't see how Alina could ever be made into something interesting. The attempt to develop her from a normal peasant into an all-powerful Fubar sun summoner aren't doing well so far, shall we say. But overall, as young adult trilogies go, I've read worse. It's very, very young adult in its writing style, though, which is disappointing because the first one was actually quite mature. I hope that the third one will at least maintain this level of age and writing style and not decrease anymore. But I will let you know in time. Oh yes, like, comment, subscribe. If you enjoyed this and you are over the age of, 13, tell me why. I can see why a 12-year-old would enjoy it. I really don't understand why a 23-year-old would. Please let me know. I would love to hear. And subscribe, because YouTube like that sort of thing.